Welcome to Too Long Don't Listen, the only podcast that will help you understand how you can turn your aspirations into a reality. This episode is sponsored by PodSqueeze, a user-friendly AI tool that makes it easier for podcast creators to convert audio recordings into digestible marketing content. I've been using PodSqueeze to generate show notes, newsletter, and blog post ideas for my podcast. They are clearly making a difference in the podcasting world by empowering over 20,000 podcast creators to save a huge amount of time on manual tasks. Welcome everyone to Too Long Don't Listen. This is Senda, your host, and today I'm very happy to have a guest, beautiful guest with me. Her name is Amma. I'm obviously going to let her introduce herself. Why don't you, Amma, start with telling us who you are, what you've been up to, and what you're doing now?
Thank you so much for the lovely introduction. It's an honor to be here. And yeah, so my name is Amma. I was the founder of an Edtech platform called Nova Tuition, and this was a personal development and maths tuition platform for kids. But more recently, the Edtech started running down, and now I've pivoted into startup tech media. So I run a podcast called Nova and Boba, where we interview the next generation of really cool tech founders in the UK. So that's currently what I'm doing now.
And I love it. And I'm happy I let you introduce yourself because I wanted you to tell us about the podcast and the community you're building. And this is how we met. I found Amma's profile. She's also graduated from UCL. So we kind of had some, common background. And of course, connecting through podcasting and the fact that you're also highlighting the stories of entrepreneurs, I think it's brilliant. As you know, the podcast is for young professionals. So people in their 20s, I mean, you and I as well, right? Like we're looking for inspiration in our career path. I'd love for you to share with our listeners what your career path looked like so far. So you mentioned that you started your own edtech company. I think that's, it sounds great, but tell us about how you got there. Like what happened before?
So at university undergrad, I studied chemistry and I used to be a maths and chemistry tutor. So I noticed that my students were always, some of the students who were failing, it wasn't because of their lack of understanding of like maths or chemistry. They had these underlying sort of confidence issues or like some sort of personal development issues that hadn't been met. So, for example, resilience or self discipline and things like that. So then I started experimenting with the students I used to teach. I was like, if I improve these skills among them, like helping them to set goals, helping them believe in themselves, have affirmations, things like that, maybe then their grades would start to soar. And it's exactly what happened. Like, as soon as I was working on my students' self confidence, they then began to like achieve really good grades, better than they ever thought they could. So we started digitalizing this, putting this in some sort of platform. And it was only me as a tutor at first, but then I started hiring more tutors and then would be taking commission on lessons. And yeah, this is how the edtech sort of began.
I love that. It's so interesting because you mentioned you graduated in chemistry, so the fact that you were curious or you were willing to help other students led you to founding your own company. Did you know that you would become an entrepreneur?
Um, I don't. I always loved entrepreneurship as a child. So I used to love watching The Apprentice. Like it was just so fascinating with me. I would always like put myself in there. I'm not sure if you've seen The Apprentice, but they basically have these business tasks to do. I believe it's over like a 12-week period, and
Okay.
the one who wins and like kind of does the best in the task over the time gets investment from like Lord Alan Sugar. And it was just such a great program and I used to love watching it. And then that kind of sparked my interest for entrepreneurship. And then I used to also sell Galaxy Cookie Crumble. Don't know if you've heard of Galaxy Cookie Crumble, but it was my favorite chocolate when I was in
I
second.
love this.
And then I was eating chocolate in school, and then my friends found out. And you know, when your friends find out you have food, you have to give some to them.
Of course.
Yeah, I only had like a line left. And I remember one of my friends was like, don't split it between me and the other friend. I'll pay you if you give me the rest of it. And I was thinking, wow, you're gonna pay me for this like line of chocolate? And they were like, and then the other girl was like, I'll pay you. And they were kind of like bidding between how much they'd pay me. And then like there was like this sort of alarm bells that rang in my head that if you provide value and people are willing to pay you, that's business. So then I went to the tuck shop, I bought more sweets, just started selling more of this. Like I expanded to sweets, more chocolate. Eventually it got shut
I
down,
love
but
this.
it
You were
was
like the sweet provider of your school. Tell us about how you turned your teaching skills into an actual business. You mentioned that you hired people to be tutors with you. So how was that experience, like learning everything on the spot?
yeah, I used to love teaching. So I'd actually started teaching in sixth form. So I used to tutor for this company called Humon when I was about like 16. So I had experience teaching like quite young children. We would do like maths and sort of English. And then throughout uni, my first year, I was teaching at this like applied maths tutoring provider. It's called Spaghetti Maths. So I was teaching like children games with maths. And then I went to Fiji to teach music and maths and English. So I was always teaching, so like I'd become quite accustomed to it. I also have two younger sisters who I was sort of tutoring now and then. And then I started hiring more tutors when I was all the inquiries I was getting from parents to tutor their children were becoming too much. And I was like, instead of just being like, oh, I don't have availability, if I find other people to tutor, perhaps I could start making money from it. And that was a really, really scary. I know it sounds like kind of obvious now, but it was a really scary transition because it feels like theft taking commission from someone else's work. Until
Mm.
that's actually what business is. If you provide value to the tutor who's looking for work, and you provide value to the parent who wants a good tutor who I could vet on behalf of some of my friends, then that's what business is. So I remember asking my first tutor via LinkedIn, would he like to tutor? And he said yes, and the parent was okay with it not having me, and that was it.
Okay, so you found like the model you could scale sustainably, and then from that, you turned this entire project into the Nova community and the podcast Nova and Boba. So I would love to hear the formal, pitch from you. Although I already know what it's all about, but I think it's a great initiative that you started here. So tell us everything.
Yeah, so basically, I was really struggling building this education platform. So it was all going well in the beginning. Like when I had my first sort of few customers, it started in the pandemic, so there was a lot of demand for like online tuition. We started just before the pandemic, but we were always online anyway. So once we had already established the frameworks online, we really started scaling in the pandemic. Um, Long story short, things started to slow down like when the pandemic was over and kids went back to school. But I was reaching out to founders, asking them, how do you build a tech platform? How do you hire more team members? Reaching out to entrepreneurs that were a couple steps ahead of me because I used to love watching like Stephen Bartlett's podcast, but those entrepreneurs were like so far ahead. And I found their content inspirational, but there was nothing practical I could really be taking from these conversations. So I would message people on LinkedIn. Would you like to chat? I've got this idea. You're a couple steps ahead of me. I would love your advice. And when you have a good conversation with someone and you're like, I've got to turn this into a podcast. That is exactly what happened. I was like, there must be other early stage founders in my boat who would love to listen to these conversations. And yeah, my education platform was called Nova Tuition. So we made it Nova and Boba because we would drink bubble tea together whilst chatting about entrepreneurship.
I love this concept. By the way, if this happens and we're doing another chat or meeting or anything, I promise you, I will make an effort to drink boba for you.
Yeah, I know you don't really like boba, do you?
Not a big fan. I don't know why. Like I used to love it actually, but then I think the bubbles just scared me a bit. But I know that it's super tasty and it's actually a pretty creative idea that you have going on here. I think it's really cool. Like I wish we were drinking something right now to share our experience. Can you tell me why podcasting? Like I'm very curious because you mentioned you felt like these conversations should have been recorded. but there's so many formats, right? Like could have been webinar, blog posts, like why
Mm.
podcasts?
Why podcasts? For example, the blog post you just gave, I feel like I'm a better speaker than writer. I'm trying to get better at writing, but I think speaking just comes slightly more naturally. And I think, when you're doing anything, just taking the path of least resistance is always the best way. And also, I'm a podcast junkie. I love podcasts. So I've actually always wanted my own, wanted to interview people. Yeah.
How does it feel being interviewed?
It feels, yeah, it gives me empathy for people on the other side because, you don't know what to say, like, you don't want to say anything weird or silly. I think I've already done that, so yeah.
Oh, me too, Ama. I think you have to go through that. But what I'd love to learn more from you is obviously, you're handling the podcast, but you still have your company on the side. Like there's a lot of things you're doing. I also know you're extremely involved in organizing events and also I think presenting at many like different conferences. So how do you keep up with everything? Like how's your work-life balance going? What's the feeling around being, always being there, like being present and still keeping an eye on I need to relax and take some time for myself.
Yeah, so I would say the first thing is that I really enjoy what I do. So when I have to like present at conferences or organize events, they can be stressful at times, but for me, when it requires extra hours, I don't mind because actually there's nothing I would rather be doing. And yeah, what else do I do? I say like I try to stay focused on the main task. So if there's a goals that we want to hit, like particular events we want to run, or like how many subscribers for the podcast, how many sponsors, like I'm trying to. It's I've not always been like this, but I'm trying to stay laser focused on the goals. So a lot of things that I feel aren't relevant to the goals, I will won't do, say no to, just prioritizing kind of what really matters.
It's really hard to say no, isn't it? Like especially when you're an overachiever and you just want to get everything done and be involved everywhere. So how do you do it? Like tell us maybe about a time when you really struggled with saying no. Like have you ever experienced burnout, or has it always been a very peaceful journey for you?
Yeah, when have I struggled to say no? I think
Never.
no, many, many, many times because when you have such a great opportunity that
Yeah.
you feel like it's not coming back, and you kind of feel sort of like guilty for saying no, or you feel like you're missing out. I think remembering that you can't. What did someone say? Like you can't do loads of things well. So for me, I always remember that at the back of my mind that like saying no to something else means saying yes to the goal that I'm trying to achieve. So even though you might feel guilty or like, feel a bit bugged down that it can't happen, realizing that everything that you do takes away from your main priority. So that's how I try
Yeah.
to write it in my head. And on your second point, I have experienced burnout before. It was once after uni. After graduating, I had my dissertation, was running the business, was running the podcast, and I think I just slept for like a good couple of days, like waking up in
Oh
between.
wow.
Yeah, it was like, and yeah, I just was feeling a bit unmotivated and dejected, but I'm better now.
I'm glad to hear that. And look, it sounds like you just, major throwback now at uni days when we were still innocent and we didn't really know what the work life balance looked like. We thought that studying was the hardest thing and exams were the scariest thing. And then you enter your post grad life and you're like, okay, this is much harder than I thought. But
Yeah.
Anna, I'm honestly, and I already told you this, but I'm so impressed with everything you do. And I think people like you, at least for me, and I'm sure for others, are a true inspiration of like persistency and being persistent, but also consistent with what you do.
Mm.
And it really comes across that you're passionate about this because I do believe that people who are passionate just don't feel as tired as if they aren't. Like there's this form of balance that comes out of doing what you love, right? So one another question I have for you is, where do you see Nova going? What are your kind of future expectations or wishes for both the podcast and the company?
Yeah, for the podcast, which I'm focusing on right now, I would love it to be this media company for early stage entrepreneurship, telling these like real stories. We really want like every up and coming tech founder to be tech founder slash regular founder to have their first sort of exposure via the podcast. Like the Colors platform on YouTube where they have like cool up and coming
Yeah,
artists. I would love people to come to Nova and Boba and be like, wow, did you hear that person's story like 10 years ago when they first got onto the podcast and they were first developing their sort of entrepreneurial, um, they were on their
journey.
entrepreneurial journey. Yeah, that would be the dream. And we would love to expand. I know you're mentioning about blogs. We'd love to expand to blogs, you know, um, things like that, just on
I
all in.
love that. And by the way, congratulations on your 1,000 subscribers on YouTube. I
Thank
think
you.
that's incredible, and I
Journey.
wish you, yeah, wish you all the growth and all the the episodes and the guests that you need to get there. Honestly, I'm really excited to see where it goes. And to close the conversation, my last question for you will be: do you have any recommendations in terms of books you've read or podcasts you've listened to, except for yours, of course, that you want to share with our listeners?
Oh, for their career journeys.
Yeah, something that inspired you in your own journey that you think someone should read.
And I would say something someone said to me is,
Okay.
I'm going to paraphrase. They said, do something that's easy for you, but could be harder for others. And it was the sense that like you should go with what you're good at. Go with your natural, like everyone's been giving these gifts and talents that they're meant to be using that I think people don't use because they're shoeboxed into, let's say, like a consulting job or things like that. But I think if you really to look at your skill set, you'd realize actually maybe consulting isn't for me. And I think if you really dig deep down and you figure out what you're good at, what you're meant to do, what comes easy to you, I think people could be living a life that's true to them and yeah, something that makes them happy.
I love this. I think this, what you just said, is literally what drove me to start this podcast in the first place, is identifying things that you're passionate about that don't necessarily fall under working at a big corporate or following the traditional career path that people think you should be doing.
Yeah.
So I really, really like this quote. It's even more powerful than a book recommendation because it's pretty, straight to the point. So thank you for sharing that. And of course, thank you so much for joining me on a recording. I was very happy to do this with you and appreciate your time.
Thank you so much for having me. Like, I love the career insights you give. I think it's really interesting. And I wish Embark on a Career, I had a podcast like yours to listen to.
Thank you. I really appreciate that.